And legal analyst Joey Jackson. Dr. O'Toole, good to see you again. Based on the details of the suspect and the details of how he allegedly murdered his victims, binding them at the head, midsection, and legs, according to the DA, as a profiler, what do you think motivated him to commit these heinous acts of violence? Based on, I understand that we're just getting the information now, but based on what you've heard so far, what do you think his motivation could have been?
So with a complicated case like this, there's never just one motive, but this is a serial sexual killer. So these crimes were done for sexual purposes. And then if you break out the elements of the case, like the bondage on the victims, and then we know after the fact that he would call and call the families' homes. It does seem to be that there's possibly some sadism involved in these cases. The autopsy will bring that out during the trial or the court proceedings. So the acts of how he treated the victims during the murders, putting hands on them, binding them, each element was sexually arousing for him. So all of that becomes really the primary motive, I think, in this case.
And just to dive in a little bit more, drill down a little bit more, why call the victims' families and taunt them? I mean, I've seen stuff like that happening in movies, but I didn't know that kind of thing actually happened.
It does happen. It doesn't happen certainly in every case, but oftentimes when people engage in that kind of behavior, that in and of itself, hearing the fear in the person's voice, if the person receiving the call started to cry, said, "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" That could also be sexually arousing for the person who could be masturbating on the other end of the phone. I don't mean to be too graphic, but we know that that's the kind of behavior someone like that would engage in. So wanting to hear the fear in their voices is really, to me, pretty indicative of sexual sadism, which is being sexually aroused by the victim's response to the infliction of physical or emotional pain. So the physical pain was inflicted on the homicide victims. The emotional pain was inflicted on family members.
And Joey, we just learned that hair from the suspect's wife was also found on or near the victims, although prosecutors noted that the wife was out of town. Explain to us the significance. How do you think prosecutors are going to use that?
Yeah, Jake, it's very significant in as much as it then limits it down to him, right? What if the suspect's wife is out of town? Then why would her hair be there if he's in town? And cell tower and other information triangulates him there, et cetera. And so it becomes problematic, obviously, and it's certainly something the prosecutors will use, I think, with great success. Having said that, Jake, will wish to tell you that at this stage, the press conference seemed to be a victory lap, and it should not be, and here's why. I don't mean to be the downer here. It's a significant development, certainly to that community, that someone has been brought to justice who they believe very strongly is the killer. We heard a lot of detailed information and evidence, much more detailed than I would imagine the DA would release at this point, but there's a long way to go. This is an indictment, and I just want to be clear about what an indictment is. An indictment is an accusation brought by a grand jury, which consists of 23 people from the community, a majority, that's 12, who have to vote out in an indictment. It is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It is simply an indication that a crime was committed, and the belief is that the suspect here committed it. And so it's very important, as they have this victory lap drilling down on all the details and specifics with respect to the evidence they have, which is a lot to overcome, to be clear that there is a lot more to go. And this will be challenged in every regard, including the DNA, and whether the testing, although DNA is significant, was done properly, whether there was any taint, any contamination. So very good development that they have a suspect and he was indicted, but it's a far cry from a conviction, and that remains to be seen whether they will get it, notwithstanding the compelling evidence that seems to be released, Jake, in that press conference.
Joey, Humerman faces charges of both first-degree murder and second-degree murder. Why?
Well, the reality is that in New York, first-degree murder can be pursued against you if you are, number one, first-degree murder if in the commission of, for example, a kidnapping or a rape, there happens to be a murder, that's first degree. What is the distinction? New York doesn't have the death penalty. You can do up to 40 years in jail. As it relates to a second-degree murder charge, which is premeditated murder in New York, that's 25 years to life. Whether first degree or second degree, certainly you're looking at a life sentence, But I think the distinction as to first was because of the fact that whether there was some sexual, certainly he took, that is the suspect, allegedly, if there was a rape or the kidnapping, that gets you to the first degree. And as I noted, the second degree would simply be premeditated murder. So prosecutors, Jake, generally charge under both theories because that's what they believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
And Dr. O'Toole, a profile on a potential suspect compiled by experts, reported on by the New York Times back in 2011, predicted, quote, he's most likely a white male in his mid-20s to mid-40s. He is married or has a girlfriend. He is well-educated and well-spoken. He is financially secure. He has a job and owns an expensive car or truck. He may have sought treatment at a hospital for a poison ivy infection as part of his job or interests. He has access to or a stockpile of burlap sacks, unquote. That is a rather specific profile, and if Huerman is ultimately responsible, incredibly accurate. How do forensic profilers go about making these predictions? Like, where did the poison ivy thing come from?
Well, these are really not predictions. What they've done is they obtained from investigators at the time all the investigative reports, all the photographs. They developed all the victimology. So they also looked at all the forensic laboratory reports. So from all of that information, that's what gives them the foundation to be able to say, this is how we interpret all of this evidence as they put it together like a puzzle. So they're not guesses. They really are based on a complete, thorough, and extremely deep dive into the entire investigation based on actual reports.
Joey, is this going to be a life in prison sentence if he's found guilty because there's no death penalty in New York?
Yeah, there's no question about that. And again, Jake, prior to that occurring, there will be a process. That process, of course, begins with what we see to be the arraignment. And that simply means that you're informed of the charges against you, your right to get counsel, et cetera. And then bail conditions are set. We know he'll be remanded. What that means is there is no set of bail which would allow for his release. Following that, there'll be the exchange of discovery, that is the specific information, that was released today to the defense. That'll be challenged, and I would presume if there's no plea, there will be a trial. That will take several months, of course, maybe even a lot longer than that. And then there will be a jury impaneled of 12 who would have to establish beyond a reasonable doubt his guilt. And in the event that that occurs at some point, I believe, which will be next year, if we're looking forward, if there's no plea before that, then without question, based upon the horrific nature of these circumstances and these deaths, it's a life sentence.
And Dr. O'Toole, the profile coupled with multiple sets of human remains, the belt with initials on it, and on and on. Why do you think it took so long to name a suspect?
Well, that type of evidence could not be analyzed years ago. The technology really didn't exist. So, for example, years ago, you had to make sure that there was a root on a hair so that you could obtain DNA. Now the technology has advanced, and now they can analyze hairs that don't have roots and obtain DNA. So this technology, in terms of the advances that we've seen in hair analysis and DNA, have been absolutely tremendous. And the kinds of information that we can get that will really hone in on a particular person is absolutely amazing. And these crimes were committed decades ago. So his lens is at looking at the forensic evidence, him being the suspect, looking at forensic evidence from 10 years ago, which probably gave him confidence back then that they could never tie him to these cases. These kinds of offenders don't anticipate that there will be these advances in forensic technology, which is going to connect them to the case. So it's pretty amazing.
Joey, I thought it was interesting that the district attorney kept talking about the painstaking efforts they made to make sure that the suspect didn't know what they were doing, like a real cat and mouse from a drama about a serial killer. They really were convinced that he was paying attention to see if anybody was on his trail.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, when you conduct an investigation, and to the police's credit, give them credit, there was a convened task force, as we heard the district attorney talk about, including the FBI, including the local sheriff, including a number of other authorities, including the state of New York, to bring about this effort to get their person. And doing that and conducting any investigation, you never want to tip off the defendant because of their activities and what they can do. And so certainly you're going to be very careful, as they were, with regard to getting him. But again, I would just hasten to add, as compelling as it appears to be that the information is, we're a long way from a conviction. And I just was, again, quite frankly, surprised at the nature of the detail that was released. I think the defense will be seizing upon this, looking for a gag order so that the defendant's rights are not prejudiced. Remember, when you have a trial, you have to get a jury impaneled, which would be fair and reasonable to get your conviction. And anything, if there's a release of information, the defense is going to say, we can't have a fair trial. Look at what the DA was talking about. How can I get a fair trial? But we'll see what happens moving forward. But based upon what was released today, there is a lot for this defendant to overcome if there's to be a not guilty verdict. Certainly, it's clear that they have done quite a bit that is law enforcement of work. And when they ultimately picked him up, Jake, they were clear last night that they believe that they have their person.
Joey Jackson, Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole, thanks to both of you for your expertise and your time.